The German officer knew exactly who had betrayed the camp, yet when British intelligence demanded the name, he folded the evidence beneath his cup and refused to speak, while guards sealed every gate and Winston Churchill arrived to find one prisoner missing, one hidden radio still warm, and a coded message already moving toward London that could expose whether the officer was protecting a traitor, protecting his men, or protecting Britain from a far greater mistake. In November 1944, Colonel Friedrich von Ahrensberg and 100 German prisoners were held at Ashcombe Hall, a converted estate in southern England where selected officers were questioned about troop movements, weapons factories, and command disputes. Captain Edward Mills supervised the compound, while Major Stephen Clark handled intelligence reports arriving from London. During morning inspection, a British technician found a homemade radio receiver beneath the floor of Barrack 3. The set contained parts removed from kitchen equipment, medical devices, and a maintenance truck, proving that several prisoners had collected components over many weeks without attracting attention. Clark ordered every prisoner into the courtyard and placed the radio on a table beside von Ahrensberg. He explained that a coded transmission had left the camp shortly before dawn, then demanded the name of the man who had operated the set. Von Ahrensberg examined the tuning marks and recognized the handwriting on a paper strip hidden beneath the battery. He folded the strip before anyone else could read it, placed it under Clark's cup, and stated that he would answer questions about the radio, but would not identify the operator. Mills treated the refusal as protection of an enemy agent and ordered von Ahrensberg removed from the other officers. Before the guards reached him, a prisoner named Lieutenant Karl Metz ran from the rear line and climbed through an open laundry window. Metz crossed the service yard, entered a maintenance shed, and started a delivery van left with its keys inside. A guard closed the outer gate, but Metz drove through a wooden barrier and reached the lane beyond the estate before a patrol vehicle followed. Clark recovered the folded paper and found only 5 groups of numbers written beside railway station initials. One station stood near London, while another served the district where Winston Churchill was expected to inspect coastal defenses later that day. British security officers redirected Churchill's motorcade and sent roadblocks toward both stations. The escaped van was found empty beside a bridge, with a military code on the seat and a bicycle missing from a nearby cottage. Mills searched Metz's bunk and discovered photographs of the camp gates, forged civilian papers, and a page removed from von Ahrensberg's private notebook. The missing page contained the names of officers who had privately discussed surrendering German units if Allied forces reached the Rhine. Churchill arrived at Ashcombe Hall after learning that the transmission might concern his route. He entered the interrogation room, placed the recovered paper before von Ahrensberg, and asked why a German colonel would risk protecting the man who had just escaped. Von Ahrensberg answered that naming the radio operator would cause British intelligence to follow the wrong trail. He then pointed toward the station numbers and warned that the real betrayal had not begun inside the German barracks, because someone outside the wire had supplied the timetable used in the message. Churchill ordered Clark to treat von Ahrensberg's claim as evidence rather than an excuse. The camp's British staff were separated from the prisoners, and every vehicle log, kitchen delivery, medical request, and maintenance order from the previous month was collected inside the estate library. The first irregularity appeared in the laundry records, where 6 fuel deliveries had been signed by a civilian contractor, although the boilers used only 4. Mills inspected the empty drums and discovered radio wire wound beneath false metal bottoms. The contractor's address led to an abandoned workshop beside a railway siding. Clark entered with police officers and found German batteries, British uniforms, blank travel permits, and photographs of senior government officials arriving at private stations. A telephone rang before the workshop search ended. Clark answered without identifying himself, and a man instructed the contractor to deliver the final guest list to a bookshop near Westminster before 6 that evening. Churchill ordered the shop watched but refused to cancel his public schedule because a sudden disappearance could warn the network that the workshop had been found. Mills returned to Ashcombe Hall while Clark carried an empty envelope to the meeting point. At the bookshop, a woman in a civil service coat accepted the envelope and walked toward an underground station. Officers followed her into the crowd, but she dropped the package inside a newspaper bin and entered a train as its doors closed. The recovered package contained a railway pass bearing Metz's photograph and the name of a British signals officer. It also held a list of prisoner interviews scheduled for the next week, including private sessions unknown outside Clark's office. Back at the camp, Mills searched Clark's filing cabinets and found no forced entry. Von Ahrensberg examined the typed interview list and noticed that one letter sat slightly lower than the others, matching the damaged typewriter used in the camp medical office. The medical orderly denied copying the schedule, but guards found carbon paper inside his locker and a key to the records room sewn beneath his mattress. He admitted preparing documents for Metz, yet claimed he had acted under orders from a British officer who knew his family's address in occupied Europe. Before he could identify the officer, the estate lights failed and smoke entered the library from a burning fuse box. Guards evacuated the prisoners while someone opened the isolation room door and removed von Ahrensberg's notebook from the evidence cabinet. Von Ahrensberg saw a man crossing the dark courtyard with the notebook and ordered his own prisoners to block the inner passage rather than follow him. Their movement trapped the intruder between two locked gates until Mills restored the lights. The captured man was a British corporal assigned to Churchill's communications detail, carrying a copied key and Metz's railway timetable. His arrest escalated the case beyond one German escape, because the radio network now reached a unit permitted to approach the Prime Minister without routine searches. The corporal refused to answer questions, but his uniform pocket contained a ticket for a night train to Dover and a luggage receipt issued at Victoria Station. Churchill sent Clark to recover the bag, while Mills transferred the corporal to a secure London facility. The luggage office produced a heavy leather case registered under a false naval name. Inside were radio codes, photographs of coastal defenses, and sealed letters addressed to German contacts in neutral countries. One envelope contained an order to expose von Ahrensberg as a British collaborator if he ever named the radio operator. Another instructed Metz to deliver the prisoner notebook, then disappear before British intelligence could compare the station numbers. Churchill confronted von Ahrensberg with the letters and repeated his demand for the operator's identity. The German officer admitted that the man remained inside Ashcombe Hall, but argued that arresting him immediately would prevent the camp from receiving the next message and leave Metz's destination unknown. Churchill allowed the hidden radio to be rebuilt under British control. Von Ahrensberg selected 3 prisoners to reconstruct the set, while engineers concealed a second receiver inside the wall and guards replaced the original battery with a monitored power source. At midnight, a coded signal instructed the operator to move the political list to a fishing vessel near Dover. Von Ahrensberg watched the prisoners' hands rather than their faces and saw Captain Joachim Brandt quietly change the spacing between number groups before copying the message. Mills arrested Brandt outside the radio room, but von Ahrensberg stopped him from announcing the discovery. Brandt confessed that Metz had threatened to expose the families of officers willing to surrender and had forced him to transmit their names. The political list did not identify spies. It identified German commanders prepared to end resistance without approval from Berlin. If the list became public too early, their families could be punished and the officers themselves would abandon contact with the Allies. Churchill ordered Brandt protected and sent a false confirmation through the radio stating that the list would reach Dover before dawn. Clark boarded a fishing boat with naval officers, while Mills transported a sealed decoy case along the coastal road. Near the harbor, a lorry struck the escort vehicle and forced it against a stone wall. 2 men in British uniforms seized the decoy case, but Mills had placed an ink capsule beneath the handle, marking their gloves and the inside of their vehicle. Police followed the stained tracks to a coastal warehouse containing Metz, the escaped corporal's commander, and equipment for printing British identity cards. Metz destroyed part of the notebook before capture, while another man escaped through a drainage outlet leading toward the harbor. The warehouse raid exposed the major consequence of von Ehrenberg's refusal because several genuine surrender contacts had already been compromised. Churchill suspended all communication with them, leaving Allied commanders without the quiet route that might have shortened fighting along the Rhine. The reversal began when British analysts examined the pages Metz had burned and discovered that the names visible beneath the damage were not written in von Ehrenberg's hand. The notebook had been copied months earlier, and new names had been added after the colonel entered captivity. Brandt identified the added entries as officers loyal to continued resistance rather than men seeking surrender. The network had mixed true and false names so that British intelligence would mistrust every German contact once the list was discovered. Churchill ordered the original notebook returned to von Ehrenberg and asked him to mark only the entries he had personally written. The colonel identified 7 genuine contacts and crossed out 11 additions, including Metz's former commander. Clark compared the authentic entries with intercepted German communications and found that each genuine officer had recently delayed demolitions, moved civilians away from battle zones, or surrendered isolated positions. The evidence confirmed that the political list had been used to sabotage real negotiations. The British corporal's commander was identified as Major Harold Vane, a signals officer who had lost a brother during the evacuation of France. Vane had begun by monitoring German prisoners outside official channels, then turned the operation into a private campaign designed to destroy every surrender contact he considered untrustworthy. Police entered Vane's London office and found it empty, but a wall map marked Churchill's next journey to an airfield where German surrender documents were expected. A red line connected the route to a maintenance tunnel beneath the railway platform. Churchill refused to abandon the meeting and instead changed the arriving aircraft, placing decoy officers on the published flight while the real German documents traveled by road. Von Ehrenberg accompanied Clark because only he could identify the seals used by the 7 contacts. At the railway tunnel, Mills found wires connected to the signal system rather than explosives. Vane planned to halt Churchill's train inside the tunnel, remove the surrender files during the confusion, and blame the theft on a German prisoner network. Brandt transmitted a final message through the camp radio, claiming the original political list was aboard the train. Vane entered the tunnel with 2 accomplices, opened a maintenance panel, and stopped the empty decoy carriage exactly where British officers were waiting. Vane attempted to burn the papers he carried, but the documents were recovered before the flames spread. They contained payment records, altered interview schedules, and proof that Metz had received every instruction from Vane rather than from Germany. Churchill confronted Vane at the airfield after the arrest. Vane argued that no German officer deserved trust, while Churchill answered that mistrust had not justified inventing evidence that could prolong the war and cost British lives. Von Ehrenberg finally named Brandt as the radio operator, but by then the name no longer identified a willing traitor. The reversal transformed Brandt into a coerced witness and exposed Vane as the man whose private vengeance had created the betrayal Churchill had been searching for. Churchill ordered the 7 surrender contacts restored under new codes, with each message divided between separate British offices so one compromised officer could not destroy the entire channel. Von Ehrenberg verified the first responses while Brandt translated technical phrases used by German field commands. The earliest reply came from a divisional commander offering to withdraw from a town if civilians received safe passage. British headquarters accepted the arrangement, and reconnaissance aircraft confirmed that German guns left their positions before Allied troops entered. A second contact reported that demolition charges had been placed beneath a Rhine bridge despite orders to preserve it. Churchill sent the warning to the nearest Allied unit. which reached the bridge controls and removed the firing cables before the retreating guards arrived. Vane's trial began in a closed military court, where Clark presented the forged lists, stolen schedules, radio equipment, and payment records. Metz testified that Vane had promised him freedom in exchange for names and then threatened to expose his family when he tried to withdraw. The medical orderly described how Vane used private information from interrogation files to control him. The captured corporal admitted stealing the notebook and opening the isolation room during the blackout. Vane's defense argued that the surrender contacts might still be German deception. Churchill supplied field reports showing abandoned defenses, rescued civilians, and the intact bridge, proving that Vane's interference had endangered operations rather than protected them. During the final hearing, police discovered that one forged message remained inside the communications system. It ordered a genuine contact to move his unit toward an Allied hospital route, an action that would make the officer appear to be preparing an attack. Brandt recognized Vane's altered number spacing and stopped the message before transmission. Clark sent a correction through the new channel, while Allied headquarters redirected the hospital convoy away from the disputed road. The German commander surrendered his unit the following morning and delivered his weapons intact. His arrival confirmed that the final forged message had been designed to destroy the last active contact after Vane's arrest. The court convicted Vane and his accomplices of conspiracy, theft of classified material, and interference with military operations. Metz remained in custody for his role, while Brandt received protection as a coerced witness rather than release from prisoner status. Churchill ordered the authentic list sealed in separate archives, with the false editions preserved beside it so future investigators could see how the deception had worked. Von Ahrensberg's own conduct remained subject to review, but his refusal to name Brandt was entered into the record as the act that prevented a threatened man from becoming the convenient answer to a larger betrayal. When the prisoners were moved from Ashcombe Hall, von Ahrensberg waited until Brandt entered the transport before boarding the final vehicle. Churchill watched from the estate steps as the gates closed, knowing that the traitor had finally been named without sacrificing the man who had been forced to carry his messages. Months later, Brandt received notice that his family had survived and that the commander saved by the final warning had surrendered thousands of men without another battle. Von Ahrensberg folded the message into the same notebook Vane had tried to steal, then passed it through the barrack window before his own transfer. In London, Churchill sealed the genuine and forged lists inside one case, preserving the difference between the man who sent the signals and the man who had created the betrayal behind them. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.